Ram students, I welcome all of you once again to the lesson number 6, substances in the daily uses. So let's revise once again whatever we have learnt in the last lecture. So students, in the last lecture we learned about what do you exactly mean by the biotic substances and what do you exactly mean by the abiotic substances. So you can see that over here there are many type of the natural things we can get from the living matter. Okay, so whatever material we receive from the living thing, that is either from the plants or either from the animals, we call them as what? Biotic substances. Is that clear? And what do you mean by abiotic substances? So whatever material we get from the non-living thing, like for example air, soil and water, etc. So such material we call it as what? Abiotic substances. So this is the basic difference between the biotic substances and abiotic substances. And one more thing which we have learned in the last lecture about that, there are certain material which we can get from the plants and again there are certain material which we get from the animals. Okay, so likewise you can see that over here wool and leather we obtain from the animals. Am I right? So these material we obtain from the animals, so that's why we can call them as what? Animal origin. And there are certain material like cotton and jute, we obtain them from the plants. So these material we call them as what? Plant origin. Okay, so students, one more thing. Now I would like to ask you over here, can you identify what material is this? Can you identify this? What is this? Is it plastic? No. Is it metal? No. So what it is exactly? Is it glass material? It is looking like glass? Yeah, of course, it is looking like a glass. So can you tell me, as you know that this glass is looking transparent, am I right? Have you ever thought that how this glass material is made up of? So let me tell you that this glass material, it is made up of sand and the calcium carbonate. The sand and the calcium carbonate, when both of them are combined together, we get the glass material. Isn't it interesting? So calcium carbonate and sand, they are not transparent, but when we combine them together we are getting the transparent material like a glass, which is very rigid and hard also. Okay, now students, now tell me that over here, one more question over here. So as you know that this glass here, as you can see that it is made up of calcium and sand, etc. So can you tell me that can I obtain again calcium and again sand by breaking down the glass? No, it's not possible. Sand and calcium cannot be obtained again from the glass. I can obtain glass from the sand and the calcium carbonate. Okay, but I can't get again sand and calcium carbonate from the glass. Correct? So these are certain kind of the changes. When we mix two substances, we get a new different material which we cannot make any changes. So this material, it is called as what? Irreversible change. We can't change them to the back condition. Exactly in the same manner, not only the glass material, even most of the time you must have seen that green chilies and tomato. So here in this example, can you see that here is a tomato, green tomato? So initially the tomato, it is green in color, but eventually as the tomato gets ripened, it turns into red in color. Correct? So you must have seen that like tomato, chilies are also initially green in color. So as time passes, chili gets converted into the red chili. So here in this case, you must have seen that these are the certain kind of the changes we observe. Right? So now you tell me that once we get all these kind of the changes, can you ever heard or have you ever seen that these red tomato, they again goes back to becoming the green tomato? No, it's not possible. Once the tomato is completely ripened, it will remain in the same condition. It cannot go back to its stage. Right? So, not only the glass material, even in the case of the plant also, the chilies and tomato, once they are changed completely, they will remain as it is forever. So, these changes which are happening only once, we call them as what? Reversible changes. What we call them as? Reversible changes. So they cannot go back to its normal stage, right? So as they cannot go back to its normal stage, this change is called as what? Irreversible change. What we call it as irreversible change. So what do you exactly mean by the irreversible thing? So there are certain changes in the properties which are permanent. Certain changes which are permanent, that is the original constituent of these substances, cannot be obtained again from the new substances. So original property of that substance is completely lost and we got the new property. So this changes, we call it as what? Irreversible change. Irreversible, that means what? Which cannot go back. Is that clear? So this type of the changes, we call it as what? Irreversible changes, which we observe in our day-to-day life as well. Is that clear what I told you over here? So students, have you ever noticed the rubber things? At our home, we use many kind of the rubber material, right? We use tire, we use many of the plastic toys, eraser and many more things. Okay, so have you ever thought that how exactly we get that rubber material? Okay, so you won't believe that actually this rubber is nothing but a natural substance. This rubber is actually nothing but a natural substance which is collected from the latex of the certain trees. So what do you exactly mean by the latex? Can you see that? Here is a plant. Okay, what is the botanical name of this plant? Botanical name of the plant means what? The scientific name of that plant. So the scientific name of the rubber plant, it is called as what? Hevea brasiliensis. Hevea brasiliensis is the name of the rubber plant. Here you can see that a white liquid or white substance which is often this white material, we call it as what? Latex. Are you getting my point? So actually speaking, rubber, it is a natural substance which is obtained by the collecting the latex of this certain tree. So what do you exactly mean by the latex? So latex is nothing but the gum or sap of the tree. Sap of the tree means what? Any type of the liquid material. So any type of the liquid material, we call it as what? Sap or gum. Okay, so this gum or sap, it is also called as what? Latex. Is that clear? And this rubber has peculiar odor and it is white in color usually. So now did you understand from where exactly we get the rubber? Till now we are just using the rubber, right? But we are not aware about from where we are getting the rubber. Now did you understand from where we are getting the rubber? So the rubber we are actually getting from the plant. Okay, the white liquid part of the plant, it is called as a latex, which is actually obtained from the plant. Okay, and that liquid part which we get, it is called as what? Latex, and that latex has a particular odor and it has a white in color. Okay, so students, likewise you must have seen that here rubber are actually speaking, they are of two type rubber. Okay, the one rubber actually it is of natural rubber and the second one is a artificial rubber. So there are two type of the rubber, natural one and here artificial one. So actually speaking, the rubber trees are found in abundance in the Brazil. So Brazil, it is famous for getting the rubber. So like the number of trees are more in the Brazil country. So actually speaking, Brazil is more famous for the rubber. But then later on, these trees were planted in other countries as well. So right now in India, the maximum production of the rubber, it is happening in the Kerala. So the Kerala is famous for the production of the rubber. So students, please do remember that if I ask you which country is famous for obtaining the rubber, then it would be the Brazil. Okay, suppose if I ask you in India where we get the rubber, then your answer should be the Kerala. Is that clear? So in India, the maximum rubber production occurs in Kerala, and if we are speaking about the country, then it's going to be a Brazil. Is that clear? The difference between this rubber production over here. So the next concept we are going to learn over here regarding the vulcanization of rubber. So what do you mean by here vulcanization of rubber? So I guess this word you are hearing for the first time. Am I right? So vulcanization means what? Vulcanization means what? Hardening of the rubber. Actually speaking, the rubber is more elastic. It is soft. Okay, but we want to use the rubber for the other uses. So if we want to use the rubber for the other uses, then little bit we have to make it harder. Okay, so this process of making the rubber harder, it is actually called as what? Vulcanization of the rubber. So now let's see what is exactly meaning of the vulcanization of rubber. So what happens in the vulcanization? Here in this process, the rubber is heated actually. The rubber, it is heated with adding sulfur. Rubber is heated with sulfur for 3 to 4 hours continuously. So what is the step number 1? Step number 1 is that rubber is heated with sulfur for 3 to 4 hours. So this is the first step. What is the second step? Second step is that to give hardness to the rubber, we are adding the sulfur. So why we are adding the sulfur in the rubber? We are adding sulfur because we want to give hardness to the rubber. Who is giving hardness to the rubber? Sulfur. So sulfur is actually providing the hardness to the rubber. Is that clear? And most importantly, the proportion of the sulfur in the mixture is determined by the purpose for which the rubber will be used. So there are different type of the material. Depending upon that, the proportion of the sulfur, it will differ from the material to material. So like for example, eraser, rubber balls and rubber toys all have the varying proportion of the sulfur in them. Do you know that the girls who use the rubber bands, or usually we all use the rubber bands, okay? So in actual, rubber bands have the proportion of the sulfur is very small. So inside the rubber band, the sulfur proportion is very less. Is that clear? So here you can see that in the picture. Here you can see that tire. Then you can see the tire, plastic toy, rubber ball, and the eraser. Okay. So these all are made up of the vulcanization of the rubber. So they are the product of the vulcanization. Actually speaking, the rubber is very soft. By doing the process of the vulcanization, we made them very harder for the different usages. So I hope so students, you must have understood regarding the vulcanization of the rubber. Okay. Do you know that how this vulcanization process came into the existence? So let me tell you one story. There is a short story over here. Do you know that the Charles Goodyear was the name of the scientist. Okay. So Charles Goodyear is the name of the scientist who spilled a mixture of the rubber and the sulfur on a burning stove. It was a mere an accident. By mistakenly what happened? He spilled the mixture of the rubber and the sulfur on the stove. Okay. Then what he exactly observed? The stove was extinguished. He noticed that the rubber has become very harder and less elastic. Okay. He repeated the experiment in a systematic way, and then he invented the process of the vulcanization. So there are certain inventions which can even happen with the help of the accident. But we want that type of the perception to notice what kind of the changes we are actually looking at. Okay, so here you can see that the Charles Goodyear actually identified the process of the vulcanization. So hard and tough tire of rubber are made just because of the vulcanization. And because of the process of the vulcanization, the tire are invented, and therefore a revolutionary change in the transportation has been occurred. Just imagine that without tire how our transportation would be. But just because of the tire, our transportation has become so much easier to go from one place to the another place. So this is how the invention of the vulcanization of the rubber has took place, and there are many more products have been made by the human beings, and all these are the man-made substances which are making use of the natural things for our betterment. So I hope so students, you must have understood regarding the vulcanization of the rubber. So let's revise once again what we have learned today. So today we have learned that a glass is made up of sand and the calcium. So once glass is made up of sand and the calcium, we can't convert glass again back to the sand and the calcium. Okay, so this is a basic difference over here which we had seen. And what else we have learned? We have learned about the irreversible changes. So there are certain changes, like once the green tomato or green chili converts it into the red tomato or red chili, it can't go back, right? So there are certain changes which remains in the substance permanently. So these type of the changes, we call them as what? Irreversible changes. So I hope so you must have understood about the irreversible changes. What else we have learned? We have learned that how exactly the rubber has been invented. So the rubber, it is actually a natural substance which is obtained from the latex of the tree. What do you mean by latex? Latex is nothing but the sap or liquid of the plant from which we obtain all type of the rubber, etc. And last but not least, even we learned today regarding the vulcanization of the rubber. What is a vulcanization? The hardening process of the rubber, where we are heating the rubber with the sulfur for 3, and we are giving the hardness to the rubber by adding the sulfur in it. Okay, and later on what we are doing over here, we are adding the sulfur in the different proportion to obtain the different type of the rubber depending upon the type of the product which we want. Okay, so I hope so students, whatever things we have learned today, you must have understood that very well. Okay, so we'll continue the next part with the next session. Bye bye, take care.